All right, thanks for coming along, everyone, and big thanks to Jakub for giving his presentation on does the uncanny curve really matter? So big hand for him.
Thanks for coming. I'm Jakub, and actually there will be two different presentations. So the first one is about the uncanny curve, and the second one will be about the inversion effect, and they are more or less related to anthropomorphism in human-robot interaction. So it's kind of practice talk for me. And be especially mean for the second one. So I expect some mean questions. It will be easier for me afterwards during the conference. So first of all, I would like to talk what is anthropomorphism. And the origins of the word come from ancient Greek. And anthropos, which means in ancient Greek man or human, and morphic, which is having a specific shape. And it's believed that the first time this term was used by Xenophanes in 6th century before BC. And it was used in relation to the gods. So what he noticed is that the gods resemble human appearance. And what he suggested is if the horses were capable of drawing, probably they would draw gods which would look like horses. And he's believed to be the first person to spot that common phenomenon. And so anthropomorphism is still nowadays rather common phenomenon, and it affects many aspects of our life. It has been used by anti-choice advocates, and they always present the unborn, well, not always, they often present unborn fetus as a human in a way to defend it. Furthermore, in Spain, the captive chimpanzees were granted limited human rights based on the fact that they were found to possess a certain degree of mind. And it's used to sell products, like in this case, the car, which has appearance quite similar to human face. We see also the anthropomorphic shapes in various objects, clouds, animals, and even geometrical features. The question is, why do we anthropomorphize? And theories of religion believe that the persistence of religion is actually due to this evolved tendency to anthropomorphize. And the function of anthropomorphism was adaptive. Guthrie suggested that perceiving a shape, uncertain shape, as human being increased chances of survival, because we could detect an enemy who wants to kill us, or otherwise we can make more friends, and therefore it was, for adaptive purposes, it was better to find human shapes. In human-robot interaction, or in general in artificial intelligence, there can be two different research aims, or there can be more aims, but they can be grouped by being either narrow aims or grand aims. So the narrow aims are when we want, for example, to test human social and cognitive development using the anthropomorphic and machine looking like robots, or when we use anthropomorphism in order to produce intuitive robots, which should make it more natural for humans to interact with. Furthermore, another goal could be to increase learning and training opportunities for robots. So anthropomorphic robots could learn not only from other robots, but they could also learn behavior from humans. On the other hand, the grand aim could be that human-like intelligence requires human-like embodiment. So the proponents of this approach suggest that the robots like Roomba, which is presented on the right-hand side here, could not really possess the human intelligence due to its physical appearance, and Geminoid would be much more appropriate for this goal. There are numerous factors found in the field of human-robot interaction which affects anthropomorphism. And some of these factors are embodiment, movement, verbal communication, emotions, intelligence. However, there are also factors related to the perceiver. So his motivation or cultural background can affect whether the robot is perceived as more human-like or less. And finally, just mere interaction with a robot can increase its anthropomorphism. Some of the outcomes of anthropomorphism are the empathy towards robots. So we empathize more with the human-like robots than with the machine-like robots, which can affect, for example, whether the robots will get destroyed or not. If we perceive it more like a human, probably people will be more reluctant. They will be more reluctant to cause it any damage. Furthermore, it can be a way of leading to reactions which are similar to human-human interaction when it's desired. The robots also can cause or elicit the social facilitation effect, where easy tasks are performed better and difficult tasks are performed worse, which can affect the human-robot cooperation. And finally, anthropomorphism can affect acceptance of robots. One of the theories which investigated the relationship between familiarity or likability and anthropomorphism is the Uncanny Valley theory proposed by Mori in the 70s. And what he proposed is a non-linear relationship between robots' anthropomorphism and likability. So with the increase of robots' anthropomorphism, so going from machine-like robots to humanoid robots, the likability of the robot is increased. However, at a certain point, once the robots start being similar to humans, there is this sudden drop and a very strong negative emotional response to the robots. And once the robots start resembling humans to enough high degree, the likability increases again. And that can be even stronger in case of when the robot can move. However, there is relatively few empirical proof of this theory. And one of the studies done by McDormand, this study, he created a series of pictures that included morphs of a robot and a human, and in order to show the Uncanny Valley. However, the problem with this study was that it created forms of entities that cannot exist in the real world, and therefore it's not a big surprise that he found that the robots were perceived as eerie. And another approach or another perspective was presented, and the criticism for the Uncanny Valley was done by Bartnek, and he showed that the toy robots and humanoids were liked more than androids and humans. So basically, there is similar to the Uncanny Valley. There is this uncanny cliff, where there is a drop of likability. However, even afterwards, like Mori's theory predicted that humans will be liked even more than the humanoid robots. But what Bartnek found is that actually the likability never reaches the same level as for humanoids. What we believe is that can be due to the complexity of design. And therefore, we propose a uncanny curve, and the results could be due to the fact that the higher probability of designing something eerie is more probable in case of more human-like robots. So it can be either in movement, appearance, or interaction, that even the smallest difference from a human could lead to this negative reaction. And in case of the less human-like robots, the probability of screwing something up is simply smaller, and therefore the likability is higher. And there are probably more subtle ways to get it wrong in case of anthropomorphic robots. Furthermore, we believe that androids could be simply compared with humans, and therefore humans are looking for things that distinguish them from the androids. However, in case of machine-like robots or humanoids, it's quite easy to notice that they are not really humans, and therefore everything which makes them a bit more similar to humans leads to their higher likability. We believe that the directions, that the future studies of the uncanny valley or uncanny curve or uncanny cliff, however you want to call it, should follow the three directions. First, we need to fix the terminology. Second, we need to find the inflection point which leads to this drop of likability. And third of all, it's necessary to investigate the entities that lie between the deepest point of the uncanny valley and the human level. So first, the terminology. The original term created by Mori in Japanese is Shinvankan. However, it seems to be particularly difficult to translate it to English. And some of the translations which were used in the studies are familiarity, likability, affinity, eeriness, empathy. However, the problem is if every single study uses different term, we cannot really compare the studies, first of all. Second of all, it looks also a bit like that we try to find the data that fits the expected graph, but we, rather than trying to adjust the graph to existing data. So once one term doesn't work, we kind of change the term, and let's see, maybe this time we manage to get this uncanny valley as proposed by Mori. Second important issue is to find the optimal level of human likeness. So what are really the characteristics that make the robot to be liked the most? And that's probably important in order to find out how to increase the acceptance of robots as a technology. And there are various embodiments, which one is the right one. Finally, the left side of the graph of the uncanny curve has been investigated quite a lot, but we have no proof that actually there is anything between the deepest point of the valley and the human. Basically, always only humans were used as a comparison points on the right side, but no entities were shown to really exist between the deepest point and the humans. And that leads to the question whether there is really this hike afterwards in likability, or there is actually impossible to find, there are no simply entities existing between androids and humans. And what we believe in is that we could use the studies of the reverse process to anthropomorphize, which is dehumanization, in order to find out these entities. So dehumanization, as defined by White, is a failure to attribute basic human qualities to others. And studies on dehumanization showed that there could be two different distinct senses of humanness. The characteristics that are uniquely human, like intelligence, emotion, recognition, that distinguish us from animals and other species. And the other way of dehumanizing others is to the human nature traits, which are like primary emotions, for example, warmth and personality. And they distinguish us from the objects. So the studies of dehumanization can suggest us what could be the characteristics that can increase robots' human likeness in interaction. And that's quite important notion that using the characteristics from dehumanization, we could study the uncanny curve in actual human-robot interaction. And that's basically because there are multiple issues with the previous studies. Previous studies of the uncanny curve use images of robots rather than real robots. So there is a question of generalizability. Can we generalize the results from the studies using images of robots to the real robots? Furthermore, the studies use only static images or videos that did not permit any interaction. And the other studies suggest that actually anthropomorphism is not something static. It changes on course of the interaction. So if really the uncanny curve, even if it exists, if it affects only the first few seconds of interaction, is it really worth the attention it receives? It is also necessary to conduct long-term studies in sense of interaction, so long-term interaction with the robots, because the perceived anthropomorphism can change. And up to now, we had neither short-term interaction nor long-term interaction. And finally, probably it's not a way to go by morphing images, as they create unnatural creatures that are impossible in the real world. So as a conclusion, anthropomorphism is a common phenomenon. its impact, however, its impact on HRI is still not well understood. So it's not well understood in the sense of its relation to other aspects like eeriness or familiarity or likability of robots. We also propose that the uncanny valleys should start being called uncanny curve, as there is simply too few empirical evidence of the uncanny valley. And there is this terra incognita of the graph on the right-hand side. So if we really want to progress, we probably should find out whether there are really any entities between the deepest point and the humans. And as proposed by us, we could use the studies of dehumanization for that. Finally, I would like to end this part of the presentation by posing a question, and where to place on this graph the technology enchants humans. So it's possible that in the future, humans will be able to be enhanced, and for example, they should receive, using the technology, they could have something implanted that would increase their strength. So a human who can lift a car with its hand, where would it be placed? Is the human the end of the graph, or can there be something more human than human? Thank you for this part. I guess I will go directly to the other one before the questions, if I find it. Very well.
I have a question, but if you want to wait for them, it's fine.
Okay, I don't know. I think maybe it's better I do the presentations and then have all the questions.
We don't do questions, please.
Regularly ask a question. That was the only question that was contributing.
I still haven't got an answer.
So in the second part, I would like to talk about the inversion effect in HRI. And first, I would like to define and give a bit of background about anthropomorphism. So anthropomorphism is attribution of human-like properties and characteristics to real or imagined non-human agents and objects, as defined by Epley. And it has been found that anthropomorphism affects acceptance of robots, and therefore is an important topic for investigation. And embodiment is an important factor of anthropomorphism. We tend to see anthropomorphic shapes all over us, which I already discussed in the previous presentation. So I'm not going to talk more about it. In order to be able to establish what's the relation between anthropomorphism and other factors, it's necessary first to be able to really measure anthropomorphism. And some of the most commonly used tools were questionnaires. However, they suffer from certain problems. First of all, participants might tend to provide the answers that they think are expected or appropriate. So like in this case, for example, it would be really hard if the experimenter asks a child regarding the interaction to provide the answer which would be negative for the experimenter. In a way, the participants might want to please the experimenter. Second of all, they might want to present themselves in a positive light. And that led to development of other additional measurement tools like robot-directed language, ethnomethodology and conversation analysis, and finally the change detection experimental paradigm, which is experimental setup, in other words. So what the change detection shows is that the embodiment of robots allocates the different embodiment of robots can lead to different allocation of attention, and more human-like robots acquire more attention on the cognitive level than machine-looking like robots. And in this study, I would like to talk about different phenomenon known as the inversion effect, which we use in our study. So the phenomenon of the inversion effect is an experimental paradigm when upside-down stimuli are significantly more difficult to be recognized than upright stimuli. and it affects human faces and body postures. However, it doesn't affect objects. It's believed that the human faces and body postures are processed differently. They are processed configurally, while objects are processed analytically. However, under certain conditions, this can be changed. And in the study done by Bernard and Gervais et al., what they showed is that sexualized female bodies did not elicit the inversion effect, while sexualized male bodies did elicit it. In that sense, the sexualized female bodies were perceived more like objects, while male body was still perceived like a human when presented in the upside-down position. And what they suggested is the proof of the objectification of a sexualized female body. And our question is, could we use this technique to make objects humanized, to reverse the process? And in order to do that, we conducted a study, and two of the research questions which we posed are robots being processed configurally, and therefore do the robots elicit the inversion effect? And second research question was, can the magnitude of the inversion effect be used as a measurement tool of targets anthropomorphism? In order to answer our questions, we measured the correctness of participants' responses, their reaction times up to the millisecond precision. We used the ePrime software for that. And finally, we conducted we used a validated Godspeed anthropomorphism scale, which is another measurement tool, and it was necessary in order to establish the validity of our new measurement. We included 33 images of robots that varied in their embodiment, starting from most mechanical, like probably looking like Roomba, to the currently available most anthropomorphic looking robots, which are geminoids and androids. We have furthermore included 33 images of human body postures, and as you can see, they were not sexualized in order not to, as that could have affected the results. Finally, we have included the 33 images of household objects as object category. And the procedure was the following. The participants first were shown the fixation point for 1 second, which was followed by the original stimuli. Here is the original stimuli of a robot presented in the, it was either presented in the upright or upside down orientation. Then it was followed by a blank, it was presented for 250 milliseconds. Then it was followed by a blank screen for 1 second, which was finally followed by the second stimulus that was either a copy of the original image or its mirrored version. It remained on the screen until the participants selected using the mouse buttons whether the presented images on the screen were same or different. And we measured, then we checked whether the responses were correct or wrong. And we used this measurement in order to calculate the accuracy of upright images. So we basically, for each original image, we calculated the accuracy, how many responses were correct. So whether the image was recognized correctly separately in the upright position and then upside down position. And finally, we have used these accuracy measurements in order to calculate the magnitude of the inversion effect, which was a difference in accuracy recognition in upright minus the accuracy recognition in upside down orientation. It was necessary to create the distractors in order to detect whether the participants really detect the differences, or otherwise we wouldn't have been able to find out whether there are false positives and false negatives. The experimental design was within participants, and in total there were 396 trials. So I will now present you how the process looked like. first there was the fixation point, followed by the first stimuli, and now the second stimuli. How many of you believe that the two images were identical? How many think they were different? Okay, who is sleeping? So those of you who thought that the images were identical were right. And now let's make another try. Now, how many of you think that the images were identical? How many think they were different? Yeah, they were indeed different. The second image was mirrored, and well, most of you were able to really easily recognize it. However, at times during the experiment, once the participants were asked to respond fast, their error rate was much higher.
Why is it? You say 250 showed first image?
Yeah.
Why is that?
It was.
Like really quick?
Yeah, but that's supposed to be still above the level that you can notice really the differences. So I mean that you can notice the image. So it's just above the priming time for the visual input. So we had 47 participants, and they had either limited or no experience with robots. Please find the details in the paper, as I guess we should proceed to the results. And we did the 2x3 repeated measures ANOVA analysis, and the factors were orientation and image type. So once the ANOVA results for the recognition accuracy brought the results for the humans as expected, so we found the interaction effect for the human stimuli, and therefore there was a significant drop of recognition accuracy when they were presented in the upright compared to the upside down orientation. Furthermore, as could have been expected, there was, considering the previous data, there was no inversion effect elicited by the. What to ask now? Or?
By the robot and
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I need to think about it. See, okay, yeah. No, because it's in order, but.
Are they both the same color? Why?
No, because I'm changing the one which I'm showing you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the objects didn't elicit the inversion effect as could have been expected. However, the probably most interesting part is for the robots, and the robots indeed did elicit the inversion effect, and therefore there was an interaction effect when considering the orientation and the image type, which was the robots. So they elicited the inversion effect, and therefore they were processed configurally. Then we followed our analysis, trying to find out whether that's really feasible to use the inversion effect as a measure of anthropomorphism. We did a regression analysis where we plotted the perceived anthropomorphism, which is the results of the Godspeed anthropomorphism scale, against the magnitude of the inversion effect. And we found a significant linear relationship between these two. However, the results were capable only of explaining 5% of variance, which we believe is not really sufficient for suggesting this method. And that was this conclusion was further supported by additional analysis. So what we are interested in to find out is how many clusters of robots exist when we plot this perceived anthropomorphism and magnitude of the inversion effect. And the graphic analysis of the graph, and as well as the silhouette, suggested that there should be two clusters. We use the PAM algorithm in order to find out, to group the robots. And these two clusters were androids, which are the 4 robots on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, my right-hand side, there are all the remaining robots. So our further analysis, we were interested to find out whether these clusters differ in the magnitude of the inversion effect. And we used the t-test for that, which was not significant for the magnitude of the inversion effect. However, once we compared these two groups on the Godspeed anthropomorphism scale, these groups significantly differed, and therefore we concluded this as a measurement tool, Godspeed is probably more suitable than the newly developed measurement tool by us. As conclusions, we showed that the images of people and robots are processed configurally, and therefore robots were processed more like humans than objects. We furthermore found a discrepancy between self-report and cognition, and I just go back here. So if you see on the anthropomorphic scale, the humans were on the right-hand side, but robots were rather close to the objects. However, if we consider on the cognitive level, the inversion effects suggest that the robots were actually processed more like humans than objects. Furthermore, we found a significant linear relation between the inversion effect and anthropomorphism. However, as said, this new method was outperformed by Godspeed anthropomorphism scale, and therefore probably its suitability is not as great as we had hoped for. Finally, I would like to end by discussing some limitations and potential future work. So definitely it was a single study and it was exploratory study, therefore it's necessary to replicate the results. We used images of robots rather than real robots, which might lead to question the generalizability of the results. However, the studies of the inversion effect up to now used images and generalized the results for humans and objects. Therefore, we believe we can do the same for robots. We use embodiments of wide spectrum of embodiments of robots. However, the embodiment of robots might change in the future, so it might be possible to create embodiments which we did not include in our study, and it might be beneficial at that point to replicate the study. We believe that mirroring images is not optimal for creating distractors, and more subtle differences should be used. Furthermore, future studies should answer the question which robots were processed configurally. So although we showed that the robots can elicit the inversion effect, we can't answer with the current study whether all the robots elicit the inversion effect, or are there certain robots which do that. And future studies should, or potentially could, include industrial and popular media robots, as well as toys with an anthropomorphic appearance, to see whether there is really something special about robots, or it affects all the objects which have human-like appearance. Thank you.
All of these stimuli that you used were static.
Yeah.
And we've noticed in some of the more recent anthropomorphized robots that they look pretty good.
Yeah.
They look very close to human. But it's only when they move that you notice the difference. It's not quite right.
Yeah.
How do you plan to extend, or are you planning to extend your study to robots that actually move, and how that would affect this uncanny valley?
Do you mean like in case of the inversion effect, or because yeah? Well, I'm not planning to really do further studies with the inversion effect at this time, but definitely the inversion effect would not be the suitable experimental paradigm in this case, because it's simply infeasible, especially to include the human stimuli and hang the humans upside down. I don't think we will find many candidates for that, especially for 250 milliseconds would be quite hard. And therefore the paradigm is not really appropriate for that. But yeah, this paradigm, there were studies which use videos, though, video stimuli, but that's still probably doesn't allow the real human.
Video humans.
Well, they use the graphical, like the image, the graphical kind of representation of humans, so they didn't really have real images of humans. But yeah, as in the first presentation we suggested, we believe definitely that the future studies probably especially of the uncanny curve should focus on the interaction, actual interaction, rather than just staying with the images, because the applicability of the results is quite limited because of that.
Well, I guess as you mentioned the limitation, I think so my question is sort of how the distracted or like objects influence the results, sort of the shape of the object. Because well, with people and robots, they just have visually basically the same shape in terms of I don't know symmetry and just a long shape with some symmetry aspects to it. And so when you showed some objects, they are somehow completely different. You showed, for example, a picture of a toaster from a perspective. So in general, with the mirroring, you have to do some spatial transformation or just some spatial rotation in terms of to solve the task somehow. So I'm not sure if the results actually talk about something if they're viewed as more, if it's sort of really sort of interpretable in terms of if they're really more viewed like humans, but you probably just see like, well, they just resemble the shape better, so you just find probably similar results just because of the similar shape rather than interpreting the results in terms of, okay, well, they are more perceived as humans rather than something else. So if we should, let's say if you had objects that had similar shapes, but just, well, I don't know, just a bottle or whatever, not just a long shape, but I don't know, whatever, or a cactus, you would probably find that those shapes are perceived more similar to humans than...
Well, actually, the original studies of the inversion effect use images of houses. So like it was, the shapes of houses are quite fixed. They don't really differ. And there was still the difference between the houses didn't really elicit the inversion effect. And we also we tried to include wide spectrum of robots. So
because if I see that picture, it's and if I have to look at the picture for 250 milliseconds of the sort of very human-like figure,
yeah,
I think it's not really surprising that it elicits similar or had similar results to actually a real human figure. Because I don't really think it's surprising to some extent because it's a similar shape and sort of it's processed just pretty similar just from the visual system to some extent. So I don't think that there's a huge interpreting step somewhere involved in that, to be honest.
Yeah, but as if you look really at some of these robots don't really have any resemblance to humans. These kind of robots.
But did you actually find exactly the same sort of for the vacuum cleaner robot? What's the result of the vacuum cleaner? So does that, for example, produce the inversion effect as well?
So what we actually mentioned, with this study we weren't really capable of distinguishing between, finding out which robots really elicit the inversion effect. The future studies definitely need to find out whether it's really all the robots which elicited or certain robots and what are the categories, especially those between. So we found out, okay, all these robots which we treated them as a whole group, so the robots did elicit the inversion effect, but we can't say that all the robots did lead to it. So it could be indeed that the most anthropomorphic robot just affected the results to that degree.
Because I'd be somewhat surprised if sort of the vacuum cleaner robot was any different from a toaster in terms of results.
Yeah. Well, the cluster analysis, we were not able to find the differences between androids and the remaining robots, but it was simply infeasible to compare all the 33 robots because that would dramatically require bigger sample size. So the future studies definitely must investigate what are the characteristics that would make an object like a robot to elicit the inversion effect. And we are not able to answer whether all the robots or some of the robots did it and which aspects of the robot or the shape or lead to that effect.
Did you slice your data by age group at any point?
No. Well, most of the participants were undergrad or graduate students.
Okay.
There were only 3 or 4 participants, which were in different group.
I just wonder if over the last 30 years, we've had quite dramatic changes in terms of how people interact with technology, and I'm just wondering if that might have some effect on the degree to which people anthropomorphize mechanical objects that may or may not seem human.
Yeah, I can't answer with this. Yeah, no, our sample was in great majority students.
Yeah, and was about some in the say that there is some kind of connection between the embodiment and the degree of anthropomorphism and the perceived intelligence. So I understand that if you look some object that looks like a human, you perceive that could be more intelligent than an object that is not like a human. But I was thinking some counterexamples, like for example, HAL in the 2001 Odyssey of Space that has not any kind of embodiment or anthropomorphism shape, or this car in the Night Ride, or in the real life, the Watson, the computer from IBM. So they don't have anthropomorphism shapes, but you have some kind of perception of intelligence, and you tend to anthropomorphize things that show some kind of intelligence. So how could affect these examples in your research? It's something important in this research?
Well, actually, that notion referred to the human-like intelligence. So the human-like intelligence, well, what is proposed by the proponents of this grand aim in AI is that human-like intelligence requires human-like embodiment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the intelligence requires human-like embodiment. Yeah, so obviously there can be certain objects, robots, and so on, which are intelligent but not human-like. But what they suggest is if you want to have human-like intelligence, also the embodiment should fit it. So you can't create human-like intelligence without having human-like physical appearance.
And another question is, you say that Morris hit the curve in the 70s, and I don't remember very well, but I guess he tested the curve based in experiments using a prosthetic hand and just a prosthetic hand.
Never tested.
Or never tested.
Never tested.
I don't remember very well, but I read in some experiment that they test the prosthetic hand and a moving prosthetic hand, and they try to validate the data with the Morris studies or something like that. But of course, I guess it's not valid anymore because the complexity of the robots now is completely different than just a prosthetic hand made in the 70s. So it's still valid, this studies, or?
Morris had this idea and he plotted this, described it. That's all he ever did. He never did an actual empirical investigation of this. And everybody thinks this is true because everybody's talking about it. It's like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, of course they're there. But if you look at what studies actually try to empirically look at it, they don't often find results that support, the curve as it is drawn.
It could be one of the goals of your research, kind of new curve.
Well, as I presented, that has been already done, but a cliff, and so, but that's not probably going to be my goal in my research.
I think in computer graphics you'll find a lot of people work on this virtual agents, the curves, with the curve itself, and where the agent and how it lies on that curve. So you might find a lot of literature in that department to support some of the things you have.
But did they find the data to fit the curve, or?
Well, I did read something in with virtual agents. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Where they did something with uncanny valley and virtual agents and how realistic it can be and where it lies on that curve. And they did a study on that.
And did they reach something on the right-hand side, like just after this dip? I mean, did they find something between the human and the lowest point, basically?
I don't really
because,
remember.
like on the other side, yeah, we have quite lots of studies. But
Yeah.
okay.
I don't remember, but I could probably look that up.
Yeah, would be cool. Yeah.
My question about the previous.
Okay.
Okay, so technology enhanced humans and people. Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of made me think about that as well. So would this fall in the same category? Because I mean, theoretically, I would think that even though somebody had, say, a bionic arm, for instance, if the if the technology resembled the function and possibly the shape of a human arm, wouldn't we naturally assign anthropomorphic properties to that arm, and it would not for instance, like if it looked like a foot or something or a leg, then yes, we would be eerie or get very from that. But if it resembled an arm and functioned like an arm.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you suggest that it would go towards the left side, right? So there will be the drop. It will be this, like, okay, but what in case if it would be invisible? What in case it would be invisible? I mean, you couldn't distinguish really that this human is sentient. It just would have this supernatural, in a way, powers. I mean, but going beyond that point. So, like, I mean, okay, now the prosthetic hand or something is really easy to distinguish. But what if we can, will be in the future able to implant something that you just won't see? I mean, you won't be able to distinguish just looking on the physical
People just
side.
react to them as human then?
That is the question. I don't have the answer.
Okay, so if you could, let's say it was something you could see, and if it functioned like an arm, it looks somewhat like an arm, and I'm saying it wouldn't be in that curve, but I mean, of course it could be area, amputees, arm itself or something, but just for that part, would that really fall into the research that says, you know, bionic parts or prosthetics generate this feeling?
Not that I'm aware of. No. I don't know. Do you know any, Christoph?
Well, Lori wasn't looking at prosthetics, you know, but then, you know, that's not really a robot. I guess the question that we were asking ourselves is, can you be more human? So, you know, if you have some sort of implant or some sort of ability that gives you superpowers, then where would you be on that graph? Because, you know, if you see me lifting a car like this, that would be pretty weird.
Right, but I don't think it would make me eerie. It like gives me the same feelings. I would argue that I would be kind of like, oh, that's.
So you will be beyond the human.
I don't think I would like fall on that like, because he was measuring like how eerie it would look for, you know, something, a robot that was pretty close to being human but not quite being human as far as movement or looks or whatever would, you know, kind of make the object unlikable. But I don't think having a super strength would fall into that, otherwise we wouldn't have all these like, you know, into that culture. I don't think that would really make anyone like back away like, ew, that's gross. It's
Yeah. Well, I don't have
something
that.
like that on that kind of addressed a similar concept in film, but not in real life.
Sure, I mean, there are people with special abilities, and I think it kind of makes people a bit comfortable at times.
I would say like superheroes, no freaks, yeah, like here's the circus, you can fight them and or like the people that are
Traditionally, the audience sees superheroes as superheroes, but the that reflects reality. Generally speaking, people who are different or non-normative in any way in our social group tend to become targets for ostracism, rejection, perception in a certain light.
Yeah, explain or hit labels.
In the story.
That's why they have to wear masks. That's the whole point of masks.
But Superman doesn't wear a mask.
He takes his glasses
Because
off.
don't-
That totally changes everything. Everybody thinks he's a nerd, you know, but then he takes his glasses off.
Exactly, he's a hero.
So, Jacob.
Yeah.
Would you go back to your, basically the terms you're using to describe them? Now, it seems to me important.
I mean this. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that this is the terminology in terms of the deep experience. It would be important to, certainly to track those down. It'd be nice to look at the neurophysics of what those terms mean, what lights up in the brain that are connected to these kind of things. But there's also a whole other side of it, which are the independent variables. And what are the characteristics of this morphism? You know, that you can begin to identify. Now, you, again, looking at static, the inversion is certainly one of the pieces of that for testing it. But I think that there are a number of spatial, other spatial factors and temporal factors that really would count a lot in this. And humans are really amazing at what they can do in terms of, for example, detecting lip syncing. And when you're only just a millisecond, if you have a problem with the synchronization of the visible part of speech versus the audio part of speech, you can be off just a few milliseconds.
Mhm.
Humans can detect that, which elicits something wrong. So I think that in order to get a handle on this whole business of the uncanny valley, we do need a richer a body of terminology, know what it means, and on both sides, not just this side, the dependent side, but also the independent side.
Yeah.
One of my PhD students at the University of Washington did, and this is, gosh, it's been 15 years ago, something like that, did something with cartoon characters. What gave them the likability and affinity and familiarity, those kinds of things. And like Muhammad was saying, in computer graphics, there's been a lot of work that's been done in this in terms of, you know, changing some of these factors in terms of the resolution and the update rates of movements and things like that, and how that affects the connection that you make to that. And the classical one, of course, is the one with the lights. What's that?
Pixar.
The Pixar lamps and things like that. That there was a personality that you could assign to them, even though they were not anthropomorphic at all, except for sort of the head and that kind of thing. And you started attributing qualities to this, but it only happened when things started moving. And the movement, then you caught on to what what was, how you could give a life or something else to this, a meta. You're bringing a lot to that little animation, just because of the way it moves. So I think that this is really a wonderful area to be in. It'll help us understand what goes on with humans, even relating to other humans. But I think you got to pin down what those things really mean, put the dimensions around them, and attribute them to the other side, which is some metrics associated with your.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Yeah, I think I think it's not even only the motion, but I think we should go even beyond. I mean, we should go really to this interaction. I mean, it shouldn't just stop at the point, when you see the robot. I mean, it's like once you start really doing something with it, what happens then? I mean, so yeah, there are definitely these two issues. That one is, I mean, first what we measure, which is presented on this slide, but the second one is what we manipulate as well. Is maybe the focus has been mainly on static images, and as such, the applicability of results probably is not as great as it should have been if we focus on the more proper factors and variables.
All right, shall we end it there and give Jakub another big hand? I'm sure he'll be happy to carry on any discussions about superheroes.